Hi everyone, the partial prophet here. Thanks for tuning in. So I wanted to remind you that we know in part and we prophesy in parts, and then when the Messiah comes, we will see fully. Okay, so I wanted to do an update on Fallen is Babylon. This is the part one of the update, and then when we see Fallen is Babylon, the second part of the prophecy, maybe I'll do an update for that. Okay, so what I wanted to show you was, okay, so what we have here is, they knocked down, this is in America, they knocked down a Christopher Columbus statue at the Minnesota State Capitol in St. Paul on Wednesday, June 10th. And that was June 10th, 2020, which is also Sivan 18 on the Hebrew calendar. And so, let's see, I'll read this article. Political tension rises after Columbus statue falls. Mike Forcia raises his hands in the air as people photograph the falling Christopher Columbus statue at the Minnesota State Capitol in St. Paul on Wednesday. Okay, so what I wanted to point out to you is the connection between when the temple was destroyed in 70 AD and the statues coming down in America today, okay? Because if you remember history, you will kind of know what's going on. And, you know, so I proposed in my other videos that the two pillars of the temple, or the two pillars of God's kingdom, were the nation of Israel and the nation of Israel, okay, right now in this time frame. And so what we have right now is that the enemies of God are trying to take down the temple, okay? So they're trying to take down one of the pillars of the temple, okay? And so when in Revelation we read about fallen is Babylon, that's relating to how you're going to see America fall, and then you're going to see Israel fall. You're going to see the two pillars of God's kingdom or God's temple fall. And so what I believe that we're experiencing right now is the first part of that prophecy, the first fallen, okay? And so I have a picture here on the left of, this is when they destroyed the temple in 70 AD, and what they did is they took the items out of the temple and then they brought it to Rome, and so they were like spoils of being able to overthrow the temple. And so I think there's a connection. We see the statue of Columbus, face down on the ground, and see what instead of like taking the statue with them, they're taking pictures of themselves with it. Okay, so that's kind of like their spoils. Okay, is selfies. They're taking selfies. And so I wanted to talk about the temple, just a really quick history, because you can go do research on your own. But this picture here of the okay, so what this is the Titus Arch. Okay, and so let's see. So it says zealot rebel leaders John of Gisela and Simon were captured by Titus in Jerusalem in 70 AD. And were paraded in Rome in the processional depicted on the Titus Arch. Okay. And so this is, I got this picture from www.bible.ca, I think is what that is, from that website. And here's what they wrote about on their website about this picture. It said the governor of Syria could not quell the uprising, and the Emperor Nero entrusted the campaign to the veteran commander Vespasian. With superior forces, Vespasian slowly and effectively subdued Galilee and Judea. When he was recalled to Rome to become emperor himself, he gave his army to his son Titus. In 70, that would be 70 AD, Titus captured and completely destroyed Jerusalem with great slaughter. Oh, the reason why they don't say AD is because I guess that's not used a whole lot. it like because it's not used by people that don't believe in Jesus, um, or counting time based on Jesus's life. So then in 73, the last flames of revolt were put out at Masada, where the last rebels committed suicide rather than fall into Roman hands. And then and then it says, of course, there's a lot of archaeology that proves Matthew 24 was fulfilled in 70 AD, like the Titus Arch, which is a Roman celebration monument in Rome of Titus carrying the contents of the temple in Jerusalem back to Rome. Okay, so I thought it was interesting because it talks about how in that day the governor of Syria could not quell the uprising. And so we see kind of a parallel with Trump really having a hard time not being able to put a stop to the mobs in America. And then um, I guess that's all I might want to say about this page. So then from Wikipedia, I got the siege of Jerusalem in the year 70 CE was the decisive event of the First Jewish-Roman War, in which the Roman army captured the city of Jerusalem and destroyed both the city and its temple. So I put that in here because I think it connects to where we can see kind of the parallel today would be like the city would be like America, and then the temple would be the nation of Israel. And, so I think, like I said, I think we're going to see the downfall of the two pillars. Okay. The siege of the city began on April 14th, 70 CE, 3 days before the beginning of Passover that year. The siege lasted for about 4 months. It ended in August 70 CE on Tisha B'Av with the burning and destruction of the second temple. The fate of the menorah used in the second temple is recorded by Josephus, who states that it was brought to Rome and carried along during the triumph of Vespasian and Titus. The bas relief on the Arch of Titus in Rome depicts a scene of Roman soldiers carrying away the spoils of the second temple. In particular, the 7-branch menorah or candelabrum. For centuries, the menorah was displayed as a war trophy at the Temple of Peace in Rome, a Roman temple paid for with spoils taken from the conquered city of Jerusalem. It was still there when the city was conquered by Vandals in 455. So they don't really know what happened to these things after the sacking of Rome in 455. There's actually a lot of legends. And so some people believe that the Roman Catholic Church has them like hidden in their I forget what they call it, their basement, the catacombs. And then some people think the Jewish people have them hidden somewhere, although I'm not really sure. I mean, if you follow Jewish history, there's not really a time when the Jewish people maybe would have had a chance to actually get these items. So I'm not really sure about that. I mean, it's highly possible they were just destroyed for the gold, because everything in the temple was made out of gold, and so that was highly possible when Rome was sacked by the Vandals, that they just took the gold, melted them down for the gold. But it is the stuff of legends. I mean, we had, that's why you had Indiana Jones, was searching for the lost ark, so it's just definitely the stuff of legends. Okay, and then in my last video, I talked about, oh wait, one more thought I wanted to say about this too, with the statues falling down. People are kind of wondering, well, what are they planning to do with the statues? What happens with the statues? And, like I read one article where one guy recommended that they be cleaned up and put in museums. So it's just kind of an interesting time frame that we're in right now. Okay, and so then in my last video, or one of my last videos, I talked about two nations, and I didn't realize this while I was making the video, because in my mind, I kind of feel like there's three nations right now, in America. I could divide people up into three, and there is that verse that talks about the city being divided into three. Um, and so then it wasn't until I was listening to my own video, like reviewing it, that it dawned on me, like, oh, I missed kind of the obvious, sorta. Was the third person, the third group of people that I was looking for is Rebecca. She represents God's people who are the ones that are wondering what is going on. Okay, so she's the third group of people. Okay, so the two nations, when it says two nations are in your womb and two peoples will be separated from your body. So the two peoples would be Trump's people and Obama's people, the two nations. And then the third group of people would be represented by Rebecca. Um, and so then in these verses in Genesis, where it's talking about the birth of Esau and Jacob, then it goes on to say two peoples, okay, two nations are in your womb, and two peoples will be separated from your body. And so that kind of connects to the story of Jesus separating the sheep from the goats. But it does kind of make me think of, um, you know how parents will say to their kids, that are making noise in the back seat of the car, they'll say, "Don't make me come back there and separate you." And so, um, so just thought, I just had that thought that it kind of connects to that too. And so what we have is kind of like the two groups of people fighting in America, and like I said, I really think that God's people are kind of the more quiet people that are just kind of wondering what's going on, and hopefully praying and, just waiting on God. Um, and then, so this relates to the three branches, okay? And so this is the picture. I've talked about this in my other videos, where this would be in Genesis, and then this is when Joseph was in jail. And so then you had the cupbearer and the baker, they came and joined Joseph in jail, and they had dreams. Okay, well, the cupbearer, he has a dream. And so my picture's not completely accurate because the three branches are not on his head, but he sees three olive branches, or yeah, or no, grape, um, not olives, but you know what grapes grow on. He sees three branches, um, and they're not on his head. He's just looking at them. And so I think the cupbearer could be a picture of Trump, and so the reason why they're not on him and he's just kind of looking at him is that, excuse me, he's connected to. I think he's connected to the hired hand, where just he doesn't really care about the sheep. He doesn't really care about the people. Um, and so that I'm talking about, that connects to, let's see if I can find it. One of the Proverbs, or, well, actually, I think it's in the beginning of John, where it talks about, it's where Jesus comes and says, "I am the door." And so then it talks about the hired hand who comes in another way, um, and about how the hired hand doesn't really care about the sheep. And so then when the wolf comes, he kind of goes running. Okay. Um, and so I think, that's a good picture of Trump, because he just, doesn't really care about. Okay, here it is, John 10. He who does not enter by the door into the fold of the sheep, but climbs up some other way, he is a thief and a robber. And so actually it says a thief and a robber, and so you could have, like, maybe the thief could be Trump and the robber could be Obama. The thief, you kind of get a connection to the buying and the selling and the merchant that Trump would be. But then it says, he who enters by the door is the shepherd of the sheep. To him the doorkeeper opens, and the sheep hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. And then it says, a stranger they simply will not follow, but will flee for him, because they do not know the voice of strangers. And then it says, let's see, he who is a hired hand, so this is verse 12, He who is a hired hand and not a shepherd, who is not the owner of the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and flees, and the wolf snatches them and scatters. He flees because he is a hired hand and is not concerned about the sheep. Okay? So that's why I think the three branches are not on the guy's head, on the cupbearer's hand, because he's not concerned about the three branches. So that's an update on that. And so I found this one article and I wanted to talk about this. Because I talked about Trump's people kind of being the people who oppose wearing face masks. Okay, so I found this article. This is from Yahoo Life, and I do kind of recognize that right now it's kind of really hard to kind of get a grasp of what's going on, because I do know there are people that are, especially in the media, that are really anti the people on the right. And so some of this stuff might be exaggeration. It's hard to really tell what's true. And I don't even know to what extent this is happening, like how many people like oppose wearing face masks. But we did see during the protest of, people that were protesting the lockdowns and stuff, that they had a tendency not to social distance and not to wear masks. So I do believe there is a group of people in this country that are opposing wearing face masks. So I'll read this article. As face masks are enacted across the country, opponents are organizing protests, unifying on social media, and challenging public officials on scientific guidelines for mitigating the coronavirus. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention recommends that people wear face coverings to help prevent the spread of COVID-19, except for children under 2 and people with trouble breathing or otherwise cannot remove their masks without assistance. A June study from Texas A&M University deemed masks the most effective means to prevent interhuman transmission of COVID-19. During a Friday briefing with the White House Coronavirus Task Force, Dr. Anthony Fauci, the nation's top infectious disease expert, said that everyone has a societal responsibility to take all precautions necessary to stop the spread of the coronavirus, including wearing masks. But a growing movement questioning the necessity of masks due to flip-flopping health recommendations, personal freedoms, and alleged health risk is resisting. This week in Florida, angry locals confronted the Palm Beach County Board of County Commissioners over an emergency order requiring face masks in public, condemning the devil's laws that seek to throw God's wonderful breathing system out the door and threatening citizens' arrest for crimes against humanity. In Arizona, Scottsdale City Councilman Guy Phillips apologized for ripping off his mask at an Unmask Us protest and proclaiming, "I can't breathe," a phrase used by George Floyd, whose death in Minneapolis police custody fueled protests around the country. Phillips later told the Arizona Republic, "I did not mean any disrespect and there was no connection to Floyd," and apologized to the man's family. Both states have experienced record-breaking increases in COVID-19 cases and were included in the CDC list of cases, including Texas, California, and Oklahoma. So it goes on to talk about, the article goes on to talk about how COVID-19, we're having an increase in coronavirus cases. And so what I think is kind of interesting is that, if some of this stuff is true, we're seeing where we have the people on the left and then like this group of people on the right, like the far right, maybe I guess you would consider them, where it's similar behavior. It's still protesting. It's still not following the laws of the country. It's still believing in conspiracy theories. And then it's interesting because we have with the Black Lives Matter movement where they're running around with signs saying "I can't breathe," and then to have people on the far right saying "I can't breathe," maybe not using those exact words because they don't want BLM to get all upset and out of shape. but they're kind of saying the same thing. I mean, this one, this one paragraph where it says the devil's laws that seek to throw God's wonderful breathing system out the door. And some of that stuff's insanity. I mean, so this is insane behavior because one, if you understand, first of all, if you have a healthy respect for the coronavirus, that we just shouldn't mess around with it. It's a dangerous disease. And then two, if you understand that the studies that they have done, masks are highly effective. Even the homemade masks that you make at home, they talk about all you need is like 3 layers of t-shirt fabric, and that's effective. And so it's really kind of a minor thing. I mean, I know it's uncomfortable, and especially now that we're in summer, it's uncomfortable. But it is like they said in this article too, you're respecting others by wearing a mask. You're protecting yourselves. You're protecting others by wearing a mask, and it's really kind of a small thing that we could do. And then, like I said in my previous videos too, it's just interesting how the coronavirus shutdown really started around Purim, because with Purim we have the Jewish people wearing masks for their Purim celebrations, and so I definitely think that's a prophetic shadow of this coronavirus. And so I really think that God is calling His people to wear masks. And God's people would be more like the non-rebellious ones. And we would be more long-suffering too. And so I've talked about this picture. This is where I show the 3 groups of people, and so I said that, God's people are in the middle, the dry land with Messiah, no lies, no conspiracy theories. They're quiet, they follow laws, they wear masks, they stay outside of Babylon. I put in the verse here, Revelation 16:19, where it says the great city was split into 3 parts. So I already talked about this in some of my other videos, but see a Trump on the one side and the sea of Obama on the other side. So then I have these verses from Hosea 5, and it says, "Hear this, O priests, give heed, O house of Israel. Listen, O house of the king, for the judgment applies to you. For you have been a snare at Mizpah and a net spread out on Tabor. The revolters have gone deep in depravity, but I will chastise all of them. I know Ephraim, and Israel is not hidden from me. For now, O Ephraim, you have played the harlot. Israel has defiled itself. Their deeds will not allow them to return to their God, for a spirit of harlotry is within them, and they do not know the Lord. Moreover, the pride of Israel testifies against him, and Israel and Ephraim stumble in their iniquity. Judah also has stumbled with them. They will go with their flocks and herds to seek the Lord, but they will not find him. He has withdrawn from them. They have dealt treacherously against the Lord, for they have borne illegitimate children. Now the new moon will devour them with their land. Blow the horn in Gibeah, the trumpet in Ramah, sound an alarm at Beth-aven. Behind you, Benjamin. Ephraim will become a desolation in the day of rebuke. Among the tribes of Israel I declare what is sure. The princes of Judah have become like those who move a boundary. On them I will pour out my wrath like water. Ephraim is oppressed, crushed in judgment, because he was determined to follow man's command. Therefore I am like a moth to Ephraim, and like rottenness to the house of Judah. When Ephraim saw a sickness and Judah his wound, then Ephraim went to Assyria and sent to King Jareb, but he is unable to heal you or to cure you of your wound. For I will be like a lion to Ephraim, and like a young lion to the house of Judah. Even I, will tear to pieces and go away. I will carry away, and there be none to deliver. I will go away and return to my place, until they acknowledge their guilt and seek my face. In their affliction they will earnestly seek me." Okay, so obviously this is talking about the judgment of God, and I believe this is talking about the judgment of God on the two nations, the 2 pillars, America and Israel. And so what I believe is that Ephraim is America, and then Judah would be representative, would be talking about the nation of Israel. um, and and so then it's interesting that it starts out by saying, "Hear this, O priest, for the judgment applies to you. You have been a snare at Mizpah and a net spread out at Tabor." And so I think that kind of connects to, I mean, it would connect to both the spiritual leaders of Ephraim and Judah, of America and Israel, and just how they've been a snare. And so, um, they're going to be under judgment just as much as everybody else. And so now is actually not a good time to be a spiritual leader, because I think, God is pouring out his judgment. Um, and then, so then it says the revolters have gone deep in depravity. And so we've seen that in America where, you know, these protesters, these rioters, they're depraved. And so we see their behavior. And then, God says, I know Ephraim, which is America, and Israel is not hidden from me. So the 10 lost tribes are not hidden from God. He knows where they are. And, I definitely think it's, the Christian America. And then it, talks about how America's deeds would not allow them to return to their God. And then a spirit of harlotry is within them. And so, and so harlotry connects to like the harlot of Babylon. And then I've connected Trump to the harlot of Babylon. And so it goes on to say, Ephraim went to Assyria and sent to King Jareb, but he is unable to heal you or cure you of your wound. And so I think King Jareb could either be Trump and or Obama. I mean, I definitely think like we have Trump's followers are looking to Trump to save them, and then Obama's followers are probably looking to him, to save them. You know, and so it could apply to either one. I mean, it's probably a double fulfillment thing. Because it was interesting. I saw at the rally that Trump had in Tulsa, Oklahoma, they were interviewing the people coming in, and there was one young lady who, when she was interviewed, she made the comment like, "Oh, Trump's going to save us from these rioters." Well, the thing is, if we're aware that I mean, today's like 33 days of the rioting, and so far we haven't seen too much, like, putting a stop to it. Um, and I said, it kind of related to, let's go back to the screen. Where the governor of Syria could not quell the uprising, just, parallels. Okay. And, what, one of the things that's keeping Trump from doing it is that, he's, been a little too brainwashed by the left, besides his own personal demons of wanting people to like him, wanting to be popular. So it says, okay, so then in verse 9 it says, Ephraim will become a desolation in the day of rebuke. And so we've seen desolation in this country. And so then, so then we read about Judah, and then it says Judah also has stumbled with them. And so we have seen, like, what we've seen is Netanyahu has been influenced by Trump. So Netanyahu has been doing some bad behavior because of, the bad influence of Trump. Okay. So then it's just fascinating that it says the princes of Judah have become like those who move a boundary. And so it's interesting that it says princes, because now we have Benjamin Netanyahu plus Benny Gantz kind of, both kind of, they've formed a unity government or something like that for Israel. And basically, I mean, this is fascinating because this verse connects to how they want to annex the West Bank right now in Israel. And so it's kind of interesting because, I mean, we know we're fulfilling prophecy when we're seeing America becoming a desolation, and then we're seeing at the same time, Netanyahu and Israel wanting to annex the West Bank. And so we are in the midst of prophecy. Okay. But for God's people, let's focus on this last line where he wants us to acknowledge our guilt and seek God's face. And in our affliction, we should earnestly seek him. That's what we should be doing in our day and age. Okay. So then, focusing on that, the princes of Judah have become like those who move a boundary. So I wrote Netanyahu wants to annex the West Bank by July 1st is the date he's been, kind of pushing around for a while. So what's interesting is that 3 people from Trump's Deal of the Century team have gone to Israel. And so I got an article, we'll read that on the next slide. But what's interesting, what I think I've figured out is, okay, so I've been talking about in my other videos, I've been talking about Trump 666. And so what I have is the first 6 was when President Trump announced he will move the embassy to Jerusalem, and that actually happened on 12/6, which is kind of interesting, or Kislev 18. The second 6, I believe, was when President Trump says it's time to recognize the Golan. And then the third 6, I believe, was when from the Trump administration, Pompeo made an announcement about the West Bank. And so what's interesting is that, okay, so this is the chief baker. The picture on the right here would be the chief baker from the story of Joseph. And so I showed you the picture of the cupbearer, and then this would be the baker. And so let me read about the chief baker. When the chief baker saw that he interpreted favorably, he said to Joseph, I also saw in my dream, and behold, there were 3 baskets of white bread on my head. And in the top basket there were some of all sorts of baked food for Pharaoh, and the birds were eating them out of the basket on my head. And so if you connect the 3 baskets to the 3 announcements, where like the first one on the head would be moving the embassy to Jerusalem, that basket, and the second basket would be about the Golan, and the third basket would be about the West Bank. So the reason why that'd be interesting is that the basket actually on the head is about the embassy, and so we've seen the embassy move to Jerusalem. Okay, so that actually happened in Israel. Okay, the other ones were kind of like these empty promises or just a bunch of hot air from President Trump. But it's interesting that in the dream, the birds were eating out of the top basket. Okay, so if you connect that to the West Bank, it's just fascinating that Netanyahu wants to annex the West Bank, that everything has all been about the West Bank lately. Okay, so just a big focus on this West Bank. And so what I think is going to happen is that it's this West Bank annexation that's going to cause Israel's enemies to attack them. And we've seen basically a bunch of people around the world, saying that they're planning to, I mean, some people have actually said they're planning to attack if, Netanyahu pushes forward with annexing the West Bank. We've had the UN against this idea. We've had lots of, even some of Israel's closer allies are not thrilled about the idea of annexing the West Bank. So what we're going to see then is that birds are going to be eating the bread. And so I think that the wine is connected to the Christians and the bread is connected to the Jewish people because, they're from the same tribe. Jesus says the bread is my body, and so it's connected to the tribe of Judah. And so then what we're going to have is birds would be a picture of like Israel's enemies, attacking them, attacking their flesh, basically. Okay, so then I'm not going to talk about this one because I talked about this in my last video, but the lion's den at the beginning it talks about 120 satraps, and then it talks about 3 commissioners. And so, um, what I thought was interesting is that 120 days after the deal of the century, the riots began in America. I mean, that exact day. Okay, so I was kind of wondering if these two verses were maybe connected, were kind of clues to time frames, prophetic time frames. And so I thought that was, I saw the 120 connecting to when the riots began. The 3 commissioners, what's interesting to that is, we see now these 3 people that are connected to Trump's deal of the century went to Israel on Friday, June 26th. That was yesterday. And then we also see a time frame of 30 days, in these verses. So I wanted to point that out. Let's talk about the 3 commissioners. So this article is from NBC News, and it says, okay, so the title of the article is Trump is undecided on support for West Bank annexation as U.S. envoys arrive in Israel for talks. Oh, I lost my S somehow. Okay, so then the article goes on to say, so this came out yesterday. With less than a week to go until Israel hopes to move forward with annexation, it's unclear whether it has the support of its most important ally, the United States. U.S. envoys arrived in Israel on Friday as the Trump administration remained undecided on whether to support the country's plan to extend sovereignty to parts of the occupied West Bank, a senior White House official told NBC News. So a little bit of anti-Semitism there with that occupied word. Ambassador to Israel David Friedman and White House Special Envoy Avi Berkowitz left for Israel Thursday night along with mapping expert Scott Lee for further meetings and analysis, the official said. The visit comes after several days of White House meetings on the topics that also involved presidential advisor Jared Kushner. The official told NBC News on Thursday that the meetings were productive but inconclusive, alluding to concerns about how annexation could affect the Trump administration's peace plan. There is yet no final decision on next steps for implementing the Trump plan, the official said. Netanyahu has been looking for formal U.S. support before proceeding. And then the article goes on to say, I didn't put the whole article in here, but it goes on to say about how on July 1st, Netanyahu can bring up the idea of the West Bank annexation. He can bring it up for debate with his cabinet on July 1st. And then, okay. So what's the article 2 goes on, so it's goes on to say it remains unclear exactly what land Netanyahu plans to annex, but he has indicated that it will fit within the Trump administration plan for peace in the region announced in January. The U.S. plan would allow Israel to annex about a third of the West Bank, including major settlement blocks, as well as the strategic and fertile Jordan Valley, the region's breadbasket, on the border with Jordan. It also envisages, I don't know how to pronounce that word, a separate Palestinian state, but one that falls short of Palestinian demands. Okay, so the U.S. plan. Let's see. So it's interesting that it goes on to say the Palestinians have rejected the Trump plan as skewed toward Israel. I think it's a little more skewed to the Palestinians because it's pumping in billions of American dollars into the Palestinian people, which I don't think is good. A very left-wing type thing to do. And then, like give more money to God's enemies. To the rebellious people. Anyway, so I thought it was interesting because we got the third basket on the baker's head, okay, and then it's interesting that the Jordan Valley is considered the region's breadbasket on the border with Jordan. What else is interesting about that is that the Jordan, you got the Jordan River that you had Joshua. Okay, so Moses couldn't take that, couldn't bring the Israelites into the land. So then the leadership transferred to Joshua, and Joshua, he led the Israelites over the Jordan River on their way into the promised land. So all very interesting, prophetically speaking. Okay, and so then what I think we're going to be moving into is the fulfillment of the fiery furnace. So I'm kind of wondering, now this doesn't work exactly, because I think God's prophecies are always, I think every story there's always a mixture of everything. But I'm wondering if kind of in general the lion's den is a picture of the riots in America, and then the fiery furnace would be a picture of Israel getting attacked. Okay. But I think, I kind of think that both the stories kind of encapsulate both events. Okay. But what happens in the fiery furnace is we have Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego get thrown into the midst of the blazing fire of the furnace. Okay. And then what we end up seeing is that the appearance, they end up seeing a fourth man loose in the midst of the fire, and the appearance of the fourth is like a son of the gods. So what we see after the fiery furnace is, well, basically what we see is a messianic encounter in the midst of the fire. Okay. So that's why I think it's interesting that I think what we're going to see is the fiery furnace. We're going to see after Israel's going to get attacked, we're going to see the Messiah the Messiah is going to show up probably around the same time that Israel gets attacked, I think is how that works. If I'm accurate. But definitely around the same time frame. So I thought it was interesting. I saw, what's the guy's name? There's a rabbi that, on YouTube that just put up a video recently, and he talked about how the riots in Germany led to the Holocaust. Like at the end of the riots, then there was the Holocaust. And so, if you understand that history repeats itself, I think I talked about this in my last video too about, I think I might have put these verses in here where I do believe it's true that the riots in America are going to lead to the second Holocaust, that we're going to see, Israel get attacked. So I thought it was interesting that there was 3 men. So it's interesting because if you just look at this one line where it says, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, these men, O king, have disregarded you. They do not serve your gods or worship the golden image which you have set up. Okay, so if you think of like God being the king, what you could see a picture of is that there's 3 men who have disregarded God, okay, and that they don't respect the nation of Israel, okay. When it says they don't worship the golden image, it would be a picture of, gold would connect to the Jewish people, silver connects to the Christians, and so it'd be a group of people that really kind of in their hearts don't have love for Israel like God's people would, okay. And so what I think is we have these 3 people from Trump's administration going to Israel, and really everyone that worked on this deal of the century, they did not have love for Israel, okay. If you understand, the deal of the century is more about making life better for the Palestinians than it is for Israel. It was definitely, put together by people that don't have love for Israel. And then it would also be put together by people that don't have respect for God, because God says, don't divide the land, don't mess with Israel is really what God says. And so here's where we are in this prophecy. And so then we're going to see a blazing fire is going to, kind of be next, sort of. I mean, first, maybe the next step would be Nebuchadnezzar and rage and anger. And so that could be a picture of the Iran guy, okay? Um, and then we're going to have, um, oh, so it's interesting too. Then it says we're going to hear okay, at the moment you hear the sound of the horn, flute, lyre, trigon, psaltery, bagpipe. So we're going to hear the sound of the horn. So what's interesting is that in July, so it's all kind of interesting that July 1st is kind of this annexation date, because if you recognize that July is the 7th month, the this in this on the Hebrew calendar, the first day of the 7th month is the Rosh Hashanah, the Feast of Trumpets. Okay, so I definitely think we're gonna see something happen on July 1st. Um, like something to do with, we're gonna hear the sound of something. Okay, is what I'm thinking. Okay, and then and then for the rest of the month, so like the 10th day of the 7th month would be would be Yom Kippur, and then there's the feast of Sukkot would be like the 15th to the 21st. Okay, so one of the things I don't know is if we're going to be following Hebrew dates or we're going to be following Gentile dates, or a mixture of the two, because the 10th of Tammuz would be July 2nd. Okay, so that could be a when we see the fulfillment of Rosh Hashanah on that date. And then we could see the Feast of Booths could happen July 7th through the 13th. Okay, so we'll just have to wait and see how it plays out. But it is just very interesting that July is the 7th month, because look up 7th month in your Bible program, and you'll see that God talks a lot about the 7th month. Okay, a very important day, a very important month on his calendar. Okay, and so with Daniel 7, I already talked about this before with the 4 beasts. We have the lion would be connected to Netanyahu and Gantz. The bear would be connected to Trump. The leopard would be connected to Obama and the Black Lives Matter people. The 4th beast would be, with the 10 horns, would be connected to the Black Lives Matter rioters. And then it says, while I was contemplating the horns, behold, another horn, a little one, came up among them. And 3 of the first horns were pulled out by the roots before it. And behold, this horn possessed eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth uttering great boasts. Okay, so I'm thinking that while Trump is busy with the rioters in America, Iran and others, Iran or whoever the little horn is, which I really think is Iran, but I think others are going to join him in attacking Israel. And I don't know, like, if a war is going to start first or they're just going to nuke the cities of Israel. I don't really know. And actually, it's kind of already kind of started, because I think there's been some rockets from maybe the Gaza Strip. So I already think that's, in response to the annexation, because we are getting close to that July 1st date. And then it talks about 3 horns pulled out by the roots by this first horn, by this little horn. And so I don't know if the 3 horns could be connected to the 666, that could be a picture of like Trump's deal of the century being declared null and void, because hey, it didn't cause peace in Israel, it caused war in Israel. But then we also see it could be a connection to the 3 guys that, I read that article that just went to Israel. It could also be connected to the 3 groups of people in America that I talked about earlier in this video. So that's what makes it difficult. So we'll just have to see how it plays out. So then, like I said, the next step is the second fallen of Babylon. And then, so I put in this verse from Revelation. So it's interesting. It's Revelation 11:9, but we see like 9:11 in there. And then it says, those from the peoples and tribes and tongues and nations will look at their dead bodies for 3.5 days and will not permit their dead bodies to be laid in a tomb. So, so we, I talked about the two pillars, how 9/11 connects to the two pillars. And then, this picture from Back to the Future, I think is a prophetic picture because it says out of time in the middle. So when we see America burning on one side and then we see Israel burning on the other side, we are out of time. It is the end of the time of the Gentiles. And so, anyways, so these verses in Revelation 11 talks about the two witnesses, and the two witnesses are talked about like the two olive trees on either side of the menorah. And so I think what it is that the two witnesses, I mean, I've talked in my previous videos about the two witnesses being connected to Trump and Netanyahu. And so I kind of think there's a double fulfillment that they are connected to Trump and Netanyahu, but also Trump and Netanyahu are the leaders of American Israel. And so really ultimately the two witnesses would be America and Israel, the two pillars of God. And so it talks about in Revelation about how the beast from the abyss comes out and attacks them. And then and so we've seen that already in America where, these people connected to Obama, the rioters, have attacked America. And then we're going to see other people connected to Obama, probably the Muslim countries attacked Israel. And then it talks about those from the people, tribes, and tongues of nation will look at their dead bodies for 3.5 days and not permit their dead bodies to be laid in a tomb. So I think like the first fulfillment of that is that I kind of see that picture of the dead bodies that we're looking at in America. So actually, it's the literal translation is dead body for 3.5 days. And so I think what we have is that we've had people taking pictures of the statues fallen in America. And it's kind of interesting. It says, will not permit their dead bodies to be laid in a tomb. And so, the statues just kind of get pulled down and then they're kind of left there for a while. And so I think that's the fulfillment of that. But then we're going to see fulfillment again for when Israel falls. And I think there could be, since I think there might be a nuclear war with Israel, I think that's why their dead bodies would be exposed for 3.5 days. And so I'm not even really sure what this time frame of 3.5 days. I mean, the half days could connect to the 5 out of the 1,335, which I connect to the Messiah. So, I definitely think there's like an overlap or something like that. So we'll just have to see how it works out. Because I'm not really good at dates. So I already talked about this in some of my previous videos. 30 days is Trump's people protesting. The second 30 days was Obama's people rioting. Okay, but then it ended up, they're still kind of around. So I was really expecting something to happen on the 24th. But I don't know if like I kind of missed it, like, because there's also a time frame of 33, which would lead us to now. Actually, though, what I've been thinking about is that I think what we're seeing is kind of the shift now from, we've had America has fallen, and so now we're gonna kind of shift over to Israel. Okay, and so what's kind of interesting is tomorrow, the 28th of June, is the 153rd day after the deal of the century. Okay, and so we have a story in the Gospels where Peter is fishing and they can't catch any fish. And then all of a sudden, Jesus comes and says, well, try the other side of the boat. Okay. And so they switch to the other side of the boat, and all of a sudden they catch 153 fishes. Okay. And so what I'm wondering is going to happen is, one, is I think the picture of switching to the other side of the boat is that, okay, now, this stuff has happened in America, so now we need to focus our attention on Israel, okay? And that maybe the eyes of the world are going to start turning their attention on Israel, okay? And I think that's really true because of the annexation, it is getting people to start focusing on that, okay? And then, but the other thought I had too was that if if Peter is like a picture of Trump, it's like maybe they haven't really caught any fish, like they haven't really caught any rioters up to this time. And so maybe, starting after, or starting on the tomorrow, or maybe the day after that, we're going to start seeing more rioters like arrested. Because it is kind of interesting when it talks about like the net of the fish, it was like there was so many of them. I mean, it was a huge number. Okay. So I think there could be connections to that. We'll just have to see how it plays out. And then, because it's kind of interesting, because yesterday, on the 26th of June, Trump signed an order to protect statues and monuments. So it would be nice if we could see in this country a little bit more, actual behavior to stop these rioters instead of just words. Okay. And it's kind of interesting that maybe really up to this point, God has allowed, he's allowed everything that has happened up to this point, because this has been his judgment on America. And then, maybe we will see a shifting. Like, I mean, basically, America's been, like humiliated or whatever by, their statues being pulled down. And so maybe that was the start of what God wanted to do. God, there's a prophecy where God talks about like pulling up your skirts, and exposing your nakedness. And so maybe we've seen, kind of the judgment for a time. Okay, I do think that there's going to be, like I said, after the Messiah comes, then I think after the Messiah leaves, he's going to let the two sides just kind of go after each other. Okay, and then I definitely think we're going to see the final judgment of Trump. But I don't know the timing of that, because now I'm wondering if we need to be focused on what's happening in Israel. I don't know if there's going to be a war. It seems like things could happen quickly, or things could happen for a while. But one of the things is July. So let me tell you that I think the longest we have to wait for anything to happen would be, okay, but I could be wrong, but I think a key date on the Hebrew calendar is Tisha B'Av, okay, and that's the 9th of Av, and that is when, that's a very bad day in Jewish history, okay, because a couple of temples were destroyed on that day. I think there's like 5 different things that happened, so it's a very bad day on the Jewish calendar, okay. What's kind of interesting is that on July 9th, okay, so that is happening on July 30th, okay. On July 9th is the start of 3 weeks of mourning for the Jewish people, okay. So Esther, there's a mention of 30 days in Esther, and then Esther talks about the Jewish people fasting for 3 days. Okay, so I don't know if that connects to these 3 weeks or not. So that's a possibility. I have to say, I'm really kind of not sure about how you have the 30 days and then you have 3 days and 3 days, it seems like. And I'm not really sure how that all works. Okay. So, anyways, but hang in there. We're so close. Okay, so right now, we've fulfilled many, many, many prophecies. Okay, right now we are in summer. Okay, I think that's a key time frame. I think we're going to see the Messiah in summer. Okay, we've passed 120,000 COVID deaths in America. I think that's a key number. Okay, so what happened was on June 23rd, that was when Obama joined the Biden campaign. I definitely knew he was coming back. Okay. And so what's interesting is that happened on the 21st week after the deal of the century. And so I think what we're going to see is kind of this shifting from, I talked about when before Trump became president, you saw even while Obama was still president, there was still kind of this shifting of power to Trump. Okay. And so maybe what we're going to be seeing is somehow this kind of this shifting of this power to Obama. Okay. Um, and so we'll have to see how that plays out. Okay. But I think we've seen the start of it on June 23rd. Okay. Is that he's back in the spotlight. Okay. And, so things are getting ready in place for him to return to power. Okay. But somewhere before he is completely in power, the Messiah comes back, is what I believe. Okay. Anyway, so it's interesting that that's fulfilled. So then we, can expect the Messiah because of the fulfillment of that. June 24th was the 42nd day after May 14th. And it was also the 30th day of the riots. So that's interesting because we see in Revelation 11 that they trample the courts for 42 months. But then another 42 could be, see, you never know where to start counting. Another 42 could actually be July 6th because that's 42 days after the riots started. So anyways, and then on June 25th was the end of the 100. Okay, so June 25th was 150 days after the deal of the century. So I'm wondering, is that the end of the 150 days of the locust, which we read about in Revelation? Because like I said, on the 28th is the 153 days after the deal of the century. So actually, it's kind of interesting that June 25th was the 150th day after the deal of the century, and then we saw like Trump signing his deal the next day. So maybe that is maybe the end of the locust. We'll have to see. If things actually start moving in this country. Or it's very possible that really what's happening now is we're shifting from America to Israel. Okay, and so then June 27th is today, day 33 after the start of the riots. Okay, and I come up with 33 comes from Leviticus 12. The woman is unclean for 33 days. It's also the 14th day of the third Passover. So there's not really like a third Passover in the scripture, but if you take the concept of the second Passover and then look at the 14th day of the third month, that could be considered a type of third Passover. So we'll have to see. I don't know. So that would be today, June 28th. Okay, so like I said, June 28th is day 153. June 30th is 66 days after 426. Okay, so the reason why I brought that out is because in Leviticus 12 we read about the woman being unclean for 66 days. Like I said, July 1st is annexation date. It's also the first day of the 7th month. Could be a type of Feast of Trumpets. We'll have to see what happens. July 2nd is 7th weeks after May 14th. July 4th is the 244th year of the United States. What is that? Like maybe the United States Constitution? It is, if I have my numbers right, it's 1335 days after voting Trump in. So that's kind of interesting. So we'll have to take a look at that because you're blessed if you make it to the 1335 days. And anyways, and so, but I am really bad with dates. I always want to push it sooner. So, and I don't want to make any promises because, like, I need to just admit that I'm bad at this because I always want it sooner and it could always end up being longer. And especially with this month with Tisha B'Av, we might not really even see Israel get attacked until Tisha B'Av. But we could maybe see a war get started. I don't know how it's going to play out. And so, we could still have the whole month of July ahead of us. So I'm not really sure. I mean, like it says, no one knows the day or the hour. I'm not really sure. I just see patterns, and mostly I can look more back after things happen and go, oh yeah, that's the pattern. But like I said, in the scriptures, I can't quite figure this out, but in the Joseph stories with the cupbearer and the baker, he talks about 3 more days, and he talks about in 3 more days is Pharaoh's birthday. In Esther, we see Esther goes to the king on the 3rd day. And then in Revelation 11, we get the time frame of 3.5 days looking at the dead bodies. So I don't know what that all means. Sometimes 3 days could be 3 weeks. Esther talks about the Jews fasting for 3 days, night or day, and then the maidens fasting for 3 days, night or day. That could connect to the 3 weeks that would be from July 10th through July 30th. So I'm not really sure. So that's what we have to work with. So anyways, but definitely look up Your Redemption Draws Nigh. We are so close. We have so much of prophecy fulfilled. Behind us, and so just hang in there. I know it's rough. Definitely pray. Definitely fast and pray. Definitely pray for God's grace to make it through. I know it's hard. Definitely read the Psalms. The Psalms are great for lamenting. And God has given us words in His scriptures to help us during hard times. And, so I really hope you could take advantage of them and, just pray God's words back to Him, because there's just a lot of cool, Psalms that He, that really kind of reflect what we're going through. So I was going to try to see, okay, so I'm trying to find Psalm 9. So I thought that was a good one. So let's see. Okay. Okay, so it says in Psalm 9, it says, the enemy has come to an end in perpetual ruins, and you have uprooted the cities. The very memory of them has perished. But the Lord abides forever. He has established His throne for judgment, and He will judge the world in righteousness. He will execute judgment for the peoples with equity. The Lord also will be a stronghold for the oppressed, a stronghold in times of trouble, and those who know your name will put their trust in you. For you, O Lord, have not forsaken those who seek you. Sing praises to the Lord who dwells in Zion. Declare among the peoples his deeds. For he who requires blood remembers them. He does not forget the cry of the afflicted. Be gracious to me, O Lord. See my affliction from those who hate me. You who lift me up from the gates of death, that I may tell of all your praises, that in the gates of the daughter of Zion I may rejoice in your salvation. The nations have sunk down in the pit which they have made. In the net which they hid, their own foot has been caught. The Lord has made himself known. He has executed judgment. In the work of his own hands, the wicked is snared. The wicked will return to Sheol, even all the nations who forget God. For the needy will not always be forgotten, nor the hope of the afflicted perish forever. Arise, O Lord, do not let man prevail. Let the nations be judged before you. Put them in fear, O Lord. Let the nations know that they are but men. So lots of good promises for God's people. Okay, God's people would be the oppressed and the afflicted. Okay, but he remembers us. Okay, he doesn't forget our cry. So hang in there and keep pouring out your heart before God. So that's my video today. Thank you so much for tuning in. I pray that you're blessed, and we'll try to keep you updated in the future, the Lord willing. So God bless and take care.